Victoria's new Premier, Daniel Andrews.
Andrew Robb, good morning, welcome.
Good morning, Barry.
Even allowing for the excitement of the moment, how much of what Bill Shorten said is true? Should the federal coalition share some of the blame?
I think Bill's kidding himself. I'm sure he doesn't believe it. I don't accept that we had a big influence. Of course, we'll be realistic. We'll have a look at the implications. But clearly, from my experience and observation, this was a state election overwhelmingly fought on state issues.
But if you go back to May, the Jeff Shaw thing hit and there was a sense of a constitutional crisis. But then the federal budget hit after that. And that double whammy seemed to put the government in Victoria on the back foot from that moment onwards.
Well, I'd go back further, Barry. Again, as a former campaign director, my sense always is that the result at the end is a function of how people have observed, consciously or unconsciously, the actions of both parties through the 4 years in the case of a state. Now, you go back 3 years, the polling difference which has occurred at the end was about identical. There's been a 4 to 6 point lead by Labor consistently for 3 years. And I found that when you get a flatline difference that is consistent for a long period of time, usually 12 months, this time we had 3 years, 2 years before Tony Abbott even became Prime Minister, by the way. When you get that flatline difference, invariably the campaigner can jump around a bit, but it ends up almost always at that same difference that was there. In other words, there's been a disposition in Victoria for a long time, and I'd say the architect of this defeat is clearly Jeff Shaw.
That scenario that you just painted, though, is emerging in Canberra at the federal level.
What do you mean?
You're behind in the polls, no. and if that remains the case...
No, well, we've still got 2 years to go, Barry. If you can be behind in the polls for a long time, if our position is judged to be, effective by the time we get towards an election, that's when you'd start to worry about that issue. But the fact is, I think, despite all the hysteria you hear and what Bill has to say, this has been a year of a first-term government. Its first year has been a year of substantial achievement. And I'd say you'd have to go back 30 years before you found a government in its first year of a first term that has done so much. And we have achieved already most of the things that we said and the Prime Minister said in particular.
Things. You haven't actually built anything yet apart from the free trade agreement.
This is not true. We have stopped the boats, right? That's a $10 billion cost that was hanging around the neck of the nation and also costing lives, thousands of lives at sea. We've stopped the boats. We've scrapped the carbon tax. That was holding back, hundreds of thousands of businesses, and families have seen a 7% and more drop in their power bills. We have scrapped the mining tax. We have got 3 free trade agreements which are transformational, and also we've made a very serious attempt. We have laid the pathway to get back to surplus, and they were the things that we said we would do, and we've knocked over a lot of that, and included we've got direct action in place.
Well, if that's right, then there are no messages, no lessons for the federal coalition. What went so wrong at the state level?
I didn't say there were no lessons. I think we have to always look at if there are lessons, and we've got to be realistic. All I'm saying is to suggest that this was Tony Abbott, which is the attempt being made, and I understand the politics of it. If I was on the other foot, I'd probably be doing the same thing. But, Bentley is one of those sandbelt seats, the marginal seats. I spent a lot of time yesterday going around the booths and further south looking at... There wasn't a word of Abbott, not a word. The place was dominated, as that has been for up to 12 months, with Trades Hall representatives through those various unions. They've been on the ground. They've been at the train stations for 12 months, and yesterday at the booths, every booth, all the way down to Frankston, was dominated by that. You didn't see it in other booths. In Brighton, which is also my electorate, none of that stuff. Just some plastic. But in those seats that turned this election and determined the result, it's only a modest it's a good effort by Andrews, by the way. They ran an astute campaign, but it's a 3 to 6 seat loss for the coalition. So we're close enough, if we have the regeneration, to really be competitive at the next election. But the fact is, this election on the ground, 4 months, has been about local issues, the fireys, the paramedics, the nurses, and the teachers.
Yeah. And is there a message there? Because that tells you people see these teachers as workers, not as trade unions.
Well, I must say to you, it was the most dishonest, deceitful campaign at that level, because putting all those union people out there, they could say anything and no one could hold them accountable. And some of the stuff they told people that was going to happen or had happened under Napthine was just total nonsense and highly deceitful. So they found a technique of telling the electorate, real big porkies without being held accountable. And that's a real danger in future elections. But also I do feel that it was overwhelmingly dictated by that. Sure, they're workers, but if you're getting told all sorts of nonsense and you see someone dressed up in a nurse's outfit, it's got a plausibility about it, and it's quite effective politics, but it doesn't lead to big messages for us.
Well, right on the cusp of this election, the government, the federal government, had what a lot of people interpreted the weekend as your worst week since you got elected. Isn't there some overlay from that? And for a start, do you know what the health policy is? Do you know what form the co-payment will now take?
Well, what I do know is that where you've got policies that you're finding difficult to get through an upper house, and Dan Andrews is going to have possibly 25% of his upper house independents, crossbenchers, so we'll see. He'll get to experience what we're going through. But where you've got that difficulty, you've got to try and accommodate it. And I must say, I've learnt through bitter experience that actually the community, I think, like to have the upper house, looking and pushing the government of the day to make sort of changes around, if they see rough edges.
Yeah, sure, but they also like the government to know what's going on. They like their own government to know what their policy is. Do you know what the co-payment policy is going to be and what it will look like?
Our co-payment policy is the $7. The
$7 stands.
But we are looking at options with the Senate. We are looking at options in the same way as in other things that we haven't got through yet. We are looking at options now.
And will you regulate or legislate?
Well, again, we are looking at options.
So
right?
That hasn't been decided. Will it be before or after Christmas?
Barry, we're looking at options. Sometimes, Peter Costello said to me the other day, he said, some of the policies which people now, praise him for, he said took 2 terms to get through the Senate. And when you've got a Senate, especially at the moment, we didn't get one thing through until July because the Labor and the Greens in alliance, even in opposition, blocked anything of any substance. Now, we've made substantial progress with the crossbenchers, and we will make more substantial progress. I kid you not. We are a government that has achieved a lot in the first year. People have got to stand back and have a look at the hard achievements. We have done this, and we've laid the foundations. Next year will be the opportunity to deliver for all with these changes.
But before then, the Prime Minister says he's got 1 or 2 barnacles to knock off the ship by Christmas. Clearly, the co-payment wasn't one of them. Do you know what the barnacles are?
Well, I'll give you an example in the Victorian one. I mean, if they've been able to deal with the pay issues for the paramedics and the fireys, they were barnacles. That's what I mean.
Barnacles. What are your barnacles?
But
what
I'm getting at is you've got to deal with these issues.
Yep.
And we haven't yet got through the co-payment. We've been negotiating the very significant and important changes in higher education, and
that's going ahead. So what is he talking about? What are the barnacles?
Hang on, Barry. We've been in discussion on that issue, and hopefully it is going ahead. But we've had to look at and accommodate the sensible suggestions being made by the crossbenchers without compromising the basic policies.
So
and that's the same with the co-payment.
Is that what he means when he says he has to get rid of some barnacles, that he will now talk talk to the crossbenchers and negotiate his way through legislation.
That's exactly what he
But he
means.
won't be dropping anything.
Well, the core policy, but we can knock off some rough edges. You know, we're not arrogant enough to say whatever we came up with in these areas cannot be improved. And we have sat down. The same thing happened with the carbon tax. Same thing happened with the mining tax. Same thing happened with other pieces of legislation on the saving sides that we have got through since July. Yeah. So we'll do it again.
And you're going off to China, I think, on Tuesday. Is that to put the finishing touches on the free trade agreement? And as I understand, you're taking Peter Costello, who you've mentioned, with you, among others.
Yeah, it's an annual get together between senior people, business, academics, and government for 2 days about the whole relationship. It's just coincidentally, in a way, a very good opportunity for me to go back and thank a few people, but demonstrate by our presence that the arrangement we have struck, which is really transformational, is something that we're going to very actively push because we now need business to take up these opportunities that have been presented by the 3 of those free trade agreements.
And free trade agreements involve give and take on both sides. What did China get out of this? Is there one issue you can identify that will hurt Australians?
Well, we have given them zero elimination of all tariffs on everything, right? So that is one of the few countries in the world that, and that's, some people would see that as a cost to us. I see that as long as we do it gradually in some areas, so where people are losing protection, they get a chance to transform their operation, transition to some other related area. But the Chinese, this is as the Chinese would put, and they love saying it's a win-win. The big thing I think they wanted, and we were able to convince them in the end, they could do it without opening the doors too much to the rest of the world. They have to transform into a service-based economy if they want to soak up still the hundreds of millions who are in poverty in China. And we are a first world. We've got wonderful services in hundreds of areas. These opportunities for Australians to go into China and help them with aged care, with anything to do with health, anything to do with education, anything to do with construction, anything to do with water management, all of these issues. 20% of the world's population's in China. They've got 7% of the water and most of it's polluted. We can help a lot with those sorts of issues on the ground and help them get to be a first world economy.
All right, we are out of time, but thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks very much, Barry.